Hey guys, it's Haven, and it is time for another One Piece chapter discussion. This week I'm going to be talking about chapter 1067 and, going through what I thought about it and some of the key parts. So, yeah, let's get into it. Okay, first off is the cover story as per usual. This time we actually do have one, so this one is again Germa Double Six's Cold-Blooded Voyage, and this is the 24th installment. This one is titled, I Forget. Who are you again? Judge vs. Caesar. So this cover story is actually kind of cool because this is like a reunion of some of the Mad Science members, and the other two that I think we know of are Vegapunk and then Queen, who we found that out back on Wano. I think this cover story is cool because you're getting like the butting of the heads of some of the Mad Science group members, because we have Judge and Caesar, and we also knew that Vegapunk and Queen were also part of this group, maybe other people too, but those are the ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. And it kind of gives you like an idea of how awful the Mad Science group probably functioned, because these people all must have butted heads constantly. And I don't know, it's kind of cool now because I have a feeling that this is like the wrap up of this is going to be coming soon, if that wasn't the final installment. And then we'll be getting something else happening that I'm not sure what. Maybe it'll be Vivi, maybe it could be the Revolutionaries, or Kobe, but I think that's just going to be really awesome when we get there. We're starting the post cover story with Luffy's group, which is Luffy, Chopper, Jinbei, and Bonney. So we start out with Bonney and Vegapunk talking, and she is commenting on the fact that this guy who used to have this giant mountain of a head, literally, has like this itty bitty tiny head, and she's like, what the fuck, dude, like where's your head? And he's like, oh, it was getting long, so I cut it. And they're like, dude, like, what the fuck? This is also where we find out that Dr. Vegapunk actually has a devil fruit, which is the brain fruit, and it makes his brain expand and expand and expand. So from what I gathered from this, of what he's saying, it's not that the brain fruit makes him smart. He is just a genius, so this fruit is actually the perfect fruit for him, but it just expands his ability to absorb knowledge. So his head gets bigger to create more space, pretty much like upgrading a computer's storage and whatnot. So like, that actually is kind of wild, but we've seen a couple characters whose fruits like are perfect matches for them, like Hancock. Hancock's beauty is why her fruit is so powerful. Like, I know we all made jokes about Blackbeard having her fruit, but that's really what it is. Like, certain fruits are only powerful because of the people who have them, So Vegapunk goes on to explain that the little apple thing on his head is an antenna that actually goes to this place called Punk Records, where his brain is stored, and I guess it continues to expand there. And then all of the different satellites that he has, they also have antennas that all go to the Punk Records. The satellite things, like the Punks, like Shaka, Lilith, and the other ones, they are like the different parts of Vegapunk, that the different curiosities he has, I guess, and he kind of has them programmed to go out, collect all these different datas, and sync it up to the Punk Records. And Vegapunk confirms here that the satellites are like created things, they're not pieces of his brain chopped up. His entire brain is housed in that Punk Records egg thing. Vegapunk starts saying how it would be so great if everybody in the world could share the knowledge with him and everybody could access it like a library, and Jinbei points out like, that might be a little problematic, dude. And then this kind of sets Bonney off. Bonney ends up like whipping out that lightsaber thing that she found before, and she says that like, Vegapunk, like, that's your problem, like, you don't care about sacrifices in the name of progress, and like, you turned my dad into this heartless weapon. And he starts freaking out. He's like, Bonney, no, like, that lightsaber is defective. Bonney, put it away. And turns out it actually is like a super like bug attracting light, and so like she gets swarmed by all these bugs, and I feel so bad for her because she's just like terrified and like ends up going out cold. And then he brings up the devil fruit that was in Punk Hazard. We of course know that this devil fruit was eaten by Momo, who was on Punk Hazard and ate that artificial devil fruit. It was the devil fruit that was marked as a failure. We finally find out why it was a failure, and it's because it turned him pink. So it's of course the fact that Dr. Vegapunk is a perfectionist, and not that something went horribly wrong with it, it just wasn't quite correct. So we actually turn to the armor that we saw in the last couple of chapters, and Luffy says, "What about this robot? You made this too, old man. Make it move." And Vegapunk's like, "Oh, actually you're not right. This is actually the legendary Iron Giant that attacked the Holy Land of Marizwa about 200 years ago." So he isn't even saying this is just tied to the Void Century. This is tied to something in somewhat recent history in the world that people actually know about. And he said it was built over 900 years ago, so we know this was built prior to the beginning of the Void Century, which means that this advanced society existed in the history before the Void Century, which kind of makes me wonder, like, do we have history before the 100-year Void, or is it just called that because there's no history before the current history that we know? You know what I mean? Like, because it makes it sound like there's history in One Piece prior to the Void Century, but if this was built 900 years ago, wouldn't there be still information around about that kingdom? You know what I mean? So, I don't know. That's just kind of like something I've been thinking about, is like if something is 900 years ago and the Void Century is we know it is like the 900 to 800 year mark, I believe. I guess my point with it is that that means that this nation or society or kingdom had to have been formed and active just in that 100-year mark, which means that either the other people that existed in the world didn't know about this society, or they had a different name and they were separate nations that came together. But you know what I'm saying? Because otherwise, why would there be information about this one, but not any information about other ancient kingdoms? You know what I'm saying? So Vegapunk pretty much says that out of nowhere, it just kind of sprung into Marizwa, which means it would have had to have climbed the red line all the way up the red line. It had to have climbed up there or shot up there with like some kind of like a source of power to propel it. And then he also goes on to say that like its objective remains unknown, but he had heard it ran out of power before it could really do anything. It just kind of appeared. And he said that the scientists of the time were absolutely astonished because this was so advanced. Even Dr. Vegapunk is like nowhere near as advanced as the society was, which is crazy because this man is like freaking, I don't even know what he is. He's something else. The world government had ordered it to be destroyed, but the scientists couldn't help themselves but to protect it because they wanted to study it, and so it's been secretly passed down without the government's knowledge here on Egghead. Vegapunk also commends them on finding this place at all because it supposedly like appears as a solid wall, but Luffy says that they just kind of blindly stumbled in here because they were all old and senile, which gives us an interesting piece of information about Bonnie's fruit. Not only does it physically change your appearance, but if she turns you old or turns you young or whatever, it can actually alter your mental perception and like your ability to have cognition in certain facets, which I think is kind of interesting. So that means that when Bonnie turns herself into Connie, she can't be turning herself that old, just probably old enough to get the wrinkles. Otherwise, she would actually be risking having like memory loss issues and stuff. I wonder if she had that issue at all when she turned into a child earlier. Now we turn back into Franky's group, and Robin starts commenting on 200 years ago. That's around the time that the Fishman Rights movement started to gain ground. And then Franky is saying, what I kind of noticed before, which was that means that the robot had to have climbed the red line to get up to Maryjois, unless there's some kind of propulsion coming from its like feet or hands or a jetpack type thing or whatever. Jaka, which is the Vegapunk that Franky is with, goes on to say that, he did everything he could to reverse engineer it and actually used this mecha giant armor guy as the basis for the Vega Force, which was the robot that he used to scoop up the Sunny with Lilith in the ocean. And he says that I lacked the scientific prowess to reverse engineer every aspect of it, and that it's difficult for him to even believe that this mechanized soldier was made over 900 years ago, because as smart as Vegapunk is and as mechanically skilled and brilliant as he can't even fully interpret and understand this thing, which Franky, of course, is astonished by. He's like, what do you mean? You couldn't recreate, even you? And he explains that it's the power source. They had a power source that would completely put everything that is in the modern world that they're using to shame. Like, it's just, he has no idea how to even go about creating this thing. And Nami is just relieved to know that, Luffy and all of them are safe, and comments on, like, the fact that, like, Bonnie's there, and Usopp is the one that says that's Jewelry Bonnie, she's a pirate. And Sanji is like, oh, like, didn't we see a little girl before? But it's kind of interesting to see that, like, Usopp is the only one that actually knows who the fuck Bonnie is. Like, I would have assumed Nami would have. The next thing that Vegapunk says, I think, is implying something a little bit different than Kuma. He says that he truly did a terrible thing to Bonnie, and Luffy interprets it as Kuma saying, like, yeah, you know what, like, you better get down and beg for her to forgive you, dude, like, you really fucked up. And he gets pissed off. He's like, you don't even know anything about it, and then says, there's something I have to give her. And I think this is kind of implying here that Bonnie and Kuma, like I had, kind of guessed earlier on, are not related. Like, by blood at least. Like, obviously she views him as her father because he probably adopted her when she was super young, but the fact that Bonnie would know Dr. Vegapunk at a young age tells me it has something to do with experimenting or whatever. I don't know if she was like somebody that he experimented on back when the Mad Science Group was a thing, and maybe Kuma took her and rescued her and adopted her and saved her life, and Vegapunk was like treating her for something. Maybe that is what her devil fruit has to do with, or I don't know. I just feel like the fact that we already know what happened to Kuma, I don't really think that Vegapunk would be hinting at that. Like, we're already aware of that. I don't know what he's supposed to give her, but I do think it has to do with the fact that she was probably another character that was experimented on at some point. I might be way off with that, but that's kind of what I think that's implying. I don't think he's referring to what he did to her father. At the end of this scene, Vegapunk says that he feels like fate brought you here today, Mugiwara no Luffy. Please, can you take me away from Egghead? And I think this is kind of interesting because we know that Vegapunk knows Dragon. We know that Vegapunk is aware that this is Dragon's son, and he's aware of the lost civilization and the 100-year void. So he probably is very much aware that Luffy is Joy Boy, or has a pretty good idea about it. You know what I'm saying? Now here's what I think Oda is doing. I think this is how he's gonna set up Elbaf, which I think is the next arc right after this one. I think what's gonna happen is that when Cypher Pole Zero comes to Egghead, which is probably gonna happen within the next chapter or two, Vegapunk won't be able to bring his brain, and what's going to happen is that he will no longer be within range for his antenna to connect to it, which means that all of his knowledge that he got from Ohara at the library in Elbath, housing all of the resource books that were going to be burned, all of that information is going to be cut off, which means the only way that Robin is going to be able to learn about this stuff is if they go to Elbath. See what I'm saying? So then we get to the next scene, which is Cypher Pool Zero on their world government issued sea vessel, beating the absolute shit out of some of the mecha beasts that the Straw Hats ran into before on the Sunny, and they're requesting entry to the port through some kind of a radio device or a snail. I'm not really sure. And then we see Rob Lucci, Stussy, and Kaku all in their CP0 attire, where they have like the all white clothes and the weird masks that cover their faces, even though we know the identity of them. But they're coming through, and then within their own group, not through the snail or the communication device, we see that they also have the Kuma Seraphim, which has now been correctly colored. Apparently it wasn't supposed to have black hair, it was supposed to have blonde hair, it was just a coloring issue. And they say that Bonney was spotted making her way here and that pest keeps slipping away. She served her purpose, let's terminate her on sight. Which makes me wonder, again, Bonney is probably a child that was experimented on by the world government or by the mad science group. At some point she was experimented on. There's something about her that the world government does not want and they're trying to snuff out. I'm not sure what exactly that is, but there's something that she knows. There's something about her DNA or something that they don't want getting out. The Lilith satellite wants to just dump the Straw Hats into the hands of CP0 and call it a day, and then the Straw Hats are of course kind of freaking out because they're like, oh my god, Rob Lucci, like did she just say Rob Lucci? Hurry up, like we need to go, like that guy's still around, he's awful. And I think it's kind of adorable. If you look at Robin, she's like one of the only ones that's not kind of freaking out. She's like puts up her fists like she's ready to duke it out with him, and I'm like, yes queen, get it. And Shaka says to tell them to hand over the Seraphim and leave. We're declining their request to dock. He says that he doesn't think that agents of the world government will respond well to that, so that they need to prepare for battle. He is already aware that they're coming here to kill him. It is not just about the Seraphim. Obviously using this as an excuse to slip through and take out all of the satellites. So he already is aware of this because he's the logic one and he uses a lot of his reasoning to figure out that. And that's the end of this scene. And now we enter the final scene of the chapter, which is happening in Kamabaka Kingdom in the Grand Line, which is now the new base for the Revolutionary Army, which is Ivankov's island and also where Sanji trained during the 2-year time hop. Also, the new home of our beloved Bonchan. Kuma is absolutely freaking out and trying to pull away from these machines and tubes and stuff that he's hooked up to. I think we can safely assume that what Shaka told Dragon was how to reverse what he had done to Kuma and to bring back his senses and his humanity, and this is probably what they're doing. I can't imagine they just came up with this all by themselves. And they're saying that they're trying to repair him, and what's wrong? Is he still being controlled by the Navy? Kuma, where are you going? You can't be moving, you're not yourself yet, where are you going? And they're all freaking out. Truthfully, I think the most telling reaction here is going to be Dragon's. I don't think we ever really see Dragon getting overly upset and emotionally stirred. He's usually pretty relaxed and kind of has a very calm manner about him, but he is full freaking out. His mouth is huge. I think we're really supposed to take that he is very emotional right now. And he's saying, talk to us, Kuma, where do you want to go so badly? And Ivankov kind of has the same reaction, and that's kind of where we leave it. So I have a feeling that Kuma regained enough of his cognition to be aware and has kind of been processing all of the information that he's seen as the cyborg like robot with no human anymore kind of vibe that he's been dealing with for at least like 2 fucking years at this point. And I think that all of that information is like processing in his actual like own consciousness, and he's going after something, whether he's going after Bonney, whether he's going after the world government, whether he's going after somebody. I don't know what he's doing, but he has a very clear motive, and I think this is the actual Kuma. I don't think this is robot Kuma anymore. I think that, I don't know if he's able to talk yet, but he definitely has some cognition back. I'd like to leave some final thoughts. So overall, I think that we are not going to get answers about the ancient civilization just yet and the 100-Year Void. I think we will get answers to devil fruits during this arc. He's going to explain devil fruits, maybe lineage factor, explaining where he thinks they came from, explaining why, you know, you can't use the devil fruit and swim, like all of these different reasonings and connections, but I do not think we're going to learn as much about Ohara as we want to. I think most of that's going to happen in Elbaf, because CP0 is already here, and we haven't gotten that much information yet, so I don't think Oda's going to give us much more about the Ancient Kingdom and the 100-Year Void. I really don't think that's going to happen till Elbaf. We'll get like a little bit more, but I don't think we're going to get full picture stuff until we get to Elbaf. I think this arc is going to be like a lot of fights happening, like Zoro probably is going to be fighting Rob Lucci. I think that's going to be Brook and Zoro's fight. I do think we're going to get a lot more Kuma lore and a lot more dragon lore in this arc as well. That's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now. So yeah, if you have anything to say, feel free to comment. Leave a like if you want. See you next time.